you. We're live, Mayor.
Thank you. I would like to call to order the City Council meeting of June the 21st, 2022. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. Community members are welcome to join us either in person or remotely, through Zoom or by telephone. Before asking the clerk to call the roll for this meeting, I'd like to entertain
Recording in progress.
a motion to excuse Councilmember Pascal from tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Falcone, seconded by Councilmember Black to excuse Councilmember Pascal. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Clerk, will you please call the roll for this evening's meeting?
Councilmember Nixon,
Here.
Councilmember Black,
Here.
Councilmember Curtis,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Falcone,
Here.
Mayor Sweet.
Here. Thank you. Our study session tonight is for an 85th Street Station Area Plan discussion. We expect to reconvene our regular meeting at approximately 7:30. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So the purpose of tonight's study session is several-fold. We want to let the council know what the expectations for the June 28th special meeting will be on the actions you'll take. And just as importantly, we want you to hear the recommendations of the Planning Commission for the meeting they had a bit ago. And we're joined tonight by the chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission, who's going to be introduced in a bit. But I'm going to go ahead and turn us over to our senior planner Allison Zeich, to kick us off.
Great, thank you, and good evening, Mayor Sweet, Deputy Mayor Arnold, and council members. We are here tonight for our final study session with you before you consider adoption of Phase 1 Station Area Plan documents next week at a special meeting on the 28th. So briefly, our agenda for this evening is, as the city manager mentioned, to give you an overview of what you are considering next week. And then we'll receive the Planning Commission recommendations from Chair Rosman and Vice Chair Reiser. We'll cover an update on the development agreement that the city is negotiating on the Lee Johnson site. Give you a brief update on schools and what we've included in the draft documents on the subject of schools. Walk through some of the incentive zoning analysis that was completed and ask for some final policy direction, and then go over next steps. So I'll hop right in with just a quick overview of what you're considering next week at that special meeting on June 28th, and that is Phase 1 adoption. And what Phase 1 adoption includes is consideration of the station area plan. That's by resolution. So since that isn't part of the required legislative process, there isn't a Planning Commission recommendation on that piece. So that'll be considered by council next week. And then items 2 through 5, which you do have Planning Commission recommendations on, that you'll be hearing tonight. So the first of those is the comprehensive plan amendments for a new station area chapter. The second is municipal code amendments that adopt new station area design guidelines. The third thing, the fourth on this list, but the third thing that you have a Planning Commission recommendation on are the zoning code amendments. That includes the form-based code for the commercial mixed-use district only. And then lastly, the parcel rezones that would rezone 15 parcels within the station area to that commercial mixed-use zone. I briefly just wanted to thank the community for their continued engagement on this process. We know we have a lot of folks that have spent a lot of time really digging into this and providing input to the Planning Commission at their hearing on June 9th, and continue to provide input to council, and just wanted to list a few of the ways that council has responded to that input over the course of the project since 2019, and that's been by extending comment periods. The first one was for the draft SEIS, holding a special meeting back in May 2021. You've authorized additional analyses prior to advancing us through the planning process. Last year, you removed the highest growth alternative that we studied in the draft SEIS from consideration. You directed and then the project team completed a fiscal impacts and community benefits analysis. And lastly, council and the Planning Commission has continued to emphasize the plan address those key community concerns. And with that, I would love to hand it over to our Planning Commission Chair, Chair Rosman, to walk you through Planning Commission's recommendations from their deliberations last week.
Hi, good afternoon, evening. I don't know what 5:30 is considered. So I just wanted to start out by saying that we spent a lot of time in the Planning Commission really working through the station area plan stuff. Like I've said, the station area is probably the biggest thing any of us here are going to do in the city of Kirkland during our time here, just due to the sheer size of the project in the area. And so I think it's really important we spend a lot of time making sure we get it right. We did have a pretty lengthy conversation last week, but we were able to get to a unanimous recommendation on everything I'm sharing tonight, which I'm really proud of. There's been a lot here, so getting to a place where we could present something to council for your review was, really important. I'm really glad we were able to get there. So for the comp plan chapter amendment, specifically, we wanted to talk about transit-oriented versus linked by transit. This was focused on by Commissioner Singal, specifically wanting to make sure that the station area plan doesn't end up in like little islands of communities, but making sure that they are linked. So throughout the station area plan and throughout like connecting it to the rest of Kirkland, that it's connected by transit, transit oriented, not just one hub to another hub. And then the amendment about the school, this was really led by Commissioner Tim Chisholm, but we all very much agreed that with a large group of new folks living in the station area, that we're going to have a lot more students in the K-12 schools, especially elementary schools. And this was based on, we'd had the school district superintendent come to a meeting previously, and they suggested that the station area is going to have enough elementary school students to need an entire new school. And so our recommendation is to prioritize a new school within the sub-area boundaries. We understand that the school district is separate from the city of Kirkland, and there's a lot of funding and like separation issues there, but we felt that it was important enough to make sure that we can do as much as we can to support a school within the station area. And then an additional comment, this was from Commissioner Heiser, was specifically making sure that we have a plan for construction staging for the entire sub-area, because it's such a big project that's going to be undertaken, and we want to make sure that the neighborhood impacts of construction vehicles and flagging and everything else are really considered on a sub-area wide level. So do you have any questions on these specific items?
I see none, Angela.
All right, shall we move on to the next? Yeah, and then this one was pretty straightforward, adopted as proposed.
See, Deputy Mayor Arnold has his hand up.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Chair Rosman. Can we go back one slide? I didn't have any questions, but did have some couple of pieces of feedback on this. First, I did listen to the Planning Commission's public hearing and attended the meeting where you deliberated, and really appreciate the work of the commission and your thoroughness, thoughtfulness, and robust discussion that you had on these issues. It really helps, and I appreciate the work that's gone into these recommendations. I support the recommendations for the transportation piece. I appreciate Commissioner Singal's comments. I believe this hits the right balance of saying we're connected to transit in the region, but also are doing the right transit-oriented development in the station area. I would like to have staff potentially explore some options on the goal around schools. There's two pieces to this. One is that it's the school district that is the decision maker. And I recognize both from the station area plan and the school issue paper, the work that the Planning Commission has done to give the school district what they needed around additional capacity. And I would like to look at something that says something more like the city will partner with the school district on the provision of a new school here. And perhaps we can get some options before the 28th. The other piece of this that may be incorporated into that revised goal, or maybe its own goal, is the discussion of the Houghton Park and Ride. Also listed in the school issue paper, the city is looking at acquiring it if it is not used by the county for a transfer station and it gets surplused by Metro. And while outside the station area boundaries, it is nearby, and it may be an interesting opportunity for a school and or parkland, and would like to have a specific goal that looks at considering those uses if the city is able to acquire that. Thank you.
Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I just want to add a footnote, I guess, to what Deputy Mayor was saying, and specifically on the subject of schools. Deputy Mayor's suggestion for how we sort of phrase this, prioritizing the provision of a new school within sub-area boundaries. I'm fine with us working on how that's worded. The thing about it is, what I really appreciate is how the staff has taken our direction from the very beginning with the concern about schools and has been meeting regularly with the school district, including our own subcommittee or our committee of our council meeting with the school district regularly and frequently to talk about this issue. So having one-on-one discussions with the superintendent just about this concern and already cooperating at a very high level. And has come back, and I mean the staff has come back with some very creative ideas. And in some ways, you can look at this and say, what the council is doing with the recommendation from the Planning Commission and the feedback we've gotten from the schools and from the feedback we've gotten from the community, we are, creating the framework in which the schools can be creative about what kind of school they might envision for this space to meet the capacity of, somewhere just south of 1,000 students, perhaps, over the course, by the way, between now and 2044, right? But also, we've said yes to impact fees that the school district has requested. And so we've also, in some ways, Kirkland is, making that commitment to make the funding available to the school to be creative and to, create a new school. So when I read this, part of my reaction was, yes, we've been from the very beginning, this council has been prioritizing the provision of, if not a new school, additional school resources within the sub-area boundaries, and I've been really proud of our work on that from the very beginning. So I just wanted to underscore that, I guess. And then on the question, this was not raised by the deputy mayor, but on the, I'm actually okay with the idea for planning and coordinating construction staging. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that this entire sub-area is not going to, this entire station area is not going to be under construction as soon as, a decision's made around the zoning. This is planning for the next decade or more. So I think there should there's no reason why we shouldn't be planning for and coordinating construction staging, but I also there's a part of me that wonders just how significant that concern really is. But, and with that, that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I just want to reinforce the statements around schools. I think the partnership is a really important way for us to proceed with this. with a combination of making property available if we can, and certainly the impact fees and the impact that that will have on the school's ability to build. And just on the construction staging, I thought that was an interesting conversation at the Planning Commission's meeting. It was kind of a, well, you know, we should have thought of that when we were doing Kirkland Urban and every other project. So it was like, I think this is maybe a little bit of an addendum that we need to add to any development discussion that we have. So given that, Angela, you want to proceed? Oops, sorry.
Madam Mayor. Councilmember Falcone had her.
Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I just want to add one additional point to that. I agree with my fellow council members. I'm really proud of the partnership with the school district and really in focusing and prioritizing additional school capacity in the station area as a member of the committee with the school district and also a mom to 3 young kids in the school district. That's something this is like particularly hits home for me. But I also just want to, we all here know this, but for the public who may, just a good reminder that this has prompted us to not just look at rezoning for additional capacity on the schools that are within the station area, but really for the Planning Commission to add it to their plan to look at school capacity, rezoning for additional school capacity citywide as well. So I think it's really encouraged us and lit a fire under us as a city to really look to the future and be forward thinking in that relationship with the school district as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Angela, back to you.
Yeah, I don't think anybody had any comments on the approve as written. Not very exciting. Anyway, so the place that I'd say that we spent the most time was on the heights. We were able to, pretty early on in the conversation, get to a place where we were all comfortable with the 150 feet height with the requirement of incentives to get to that 150. The 250 feet was a lot more contentious, but so we spent quite a bit of time talking about if we're going to go over 150 feet, that there really needed to be some great stuff that the community would get out of this. And I have to thank Adam. He helped us write this language, basically taking what we had talked about and helped put it into a coherent form. And I really do appreciate the monumental public benefit, because I think that piece really sticks to our conversation, was that, if we're going to go above 150, we do have buildings up to 200 feet in Totem Lake. So 150 is well within what we've seen in the city of Kirkland. 200 feet is what we've seen in the city of Kirkland. So if we're going to go up to 250, then we really wanted to make sure that we spent some time talking about the incentives, specifically affordable housing as number one as the first tier, and then transit infrastructure, parks, and schools as second tier. We had talked about wanting another meeting to explore these trade-offs further. And what this really was about is making sure that, this conversation gets talked about more, because we feel it's a big enough thing to do. And so if there's a way to do another public meeting or something of the like, I think it would be really helpful to just spend a little bit more time. I realize that there's some urgency to get through the end of the beginning of this process so that we can dig in a little bit deeper. But, having one conversation specifically about what public benefits we, as, the commission, the council, and the community would like to see, I think would be very helpful. And I think that's really the number one thing, was the heights. So I don't know if we wanted to talk about that, or really this is just looking at the map. So I'd say that's probably it.
Okay. Any comments, discussion? Okay, let's continue with the presentation then. So this is going to is this going to take us to a little bit more discussion around what's going to happen at the development plan stage?
Yes. So, given that the Planning Commission's focus was on the height between 150 and 250, we thought this was the right time to talk a little bit about how the development agreement is addressing height. And so we decided to move that up to the next part of the presentation instead of at the very end of the presentation. So I think our Deputy City Manager, Tracy Dunlap, who's been coordinating the development agreement work, is going to give this part.
Welcome, Tracy. Good to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. So I think this is a repeat of a slide from one of our prior elements, but we just wanted to, or prior presentations, but we just wanted to remind you where we are with the development agreement and then provide some additional information that we actually received from Google today, and then talk a little bit about the amenities that we're documenting as part of the development agreement process. And so, again, the purpose of negotiating a development agreement that would address Google's redevelopment on the Lee Johnson site would be to give them some certainty related to making a purchase decision, but also make sure that the city gets amenities, gets public benefits that meet or exceed the amount that would be required under the form-based code that's under consideration for the commercial mixed-use area. So it's not just to give the potential development some certainty, but it's to give the city some certainty as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we have in there on the public benefits. There will be a public hearing on the development agreement. I believe it's scheduled now for Wednesday, July 6th.
That's
as a special meeting, because we expect there will be a lot of interest and a lot of comment based on our experience with the Planning Commission on the stationary plan. And that development agreement is actually a contractual agreement that the council would approve by ordinance or resolution upon the public hearing and any further guidance to staff. And so at this point, again, a special meeting is scheduled on Wednesday, the 6th of July, to take that public comment, and then we expect to bring it back to you likely at the second meeting in July for further deliberations. The box on the right is language from the form-based code draft that talks about a catalyst project. And I wanted to just speak to that for a moment and kind of give you some context of why we think it's important to define a catalyst project, and that it's appropriate that a catalyst project would potentially have a development agreement. And I think the experience that the city had with Totem Lake is somewhat instructive. A lot of zoning changes were made many, many years ago to try to encourage redevelopment in Totem Lake. And there was hope, 15 years ago with the original development agreement, that there would be a catalyst project. Through a whole series of events, including a recession and a change in ownership of that, it took a long time for Totem Lake to redevelop. And when it did, the development of the village at Totem Lake then spurred all of the other types of development that was part of the vision for making changes to Totem Lake, almost 20 years ago, the zoning in Totem Lake. And so the value of a catalyst project, I think, was really demonstrated there. We also learned a lot of lessons about how to plan for that, reprioritizing parks projects, things of that nature when that actually happened. And so at this point, we're basically defining it as very large projects, because those are probably the hardest projects to put into a box, a box of actual amenities, because it depends on the site and the topography and the use that they're making. And so we think being able to have more detail and the ability to really define what those amenities and public benefits are going to be will help meet what the Planning Commission was talking about in terms of making sure that you're really getting some benefit above and beyond what you would if you kept the zoning at 150 feet in this particular case. And so, again, I wanted to share a little bit an attachment that came in a letter that came from Google earlier today that gives you a general idea of their thoughts in terms of height. So, Allison, so this conceptual diagram that they put together is basically a profile of the buildings they're proposing, looking at what 250 feet looks like. And some of the key things about this is it illustrates the topography of that Lee Johnson site, which actually has a great slope in it, a substantial slope in it, sloping down to 85th Street. And that Google right now in their concepts are proposing to use commercial mass timber construction, which actually has a limit in terms of how high you can build above grade of 180 feet. And so what this diagram shows is the actual structures themselves are likely to be well below the 250 feet, with the rooftop appurtenances and other features being on top of that mass timber construction, but also likely being well within the 250-foot envelope. And so while we're putting a development envelope at 250 feet, the conceptual planning that they've done is really well below that, and that's very much about the materials they're planning to use. And so at this juncture, this is the kind of information we're sharing to make sure that we have common understandings of what we think is going to happen on the site and what they're planning. And we just wanted to share their concept because it, I think, will help alleviate that while it's a 250-foot maximum, that if they build it with the sustainable materials they're planning, that their plan is to not build each structure up to that 250-foot maximum. So I don't know if there are any questions about that or if I missed anything, City Manager.
Just one quick clarification in case you asked, is that these are the building envelopes. These are not like the proposed what the buildings would look like. So they'll still comply with all the design guidelines of the form-based code. So they'll look a lot different than this and have step backs and all that too. So this was just the massing drawing, but just in case anyone was concerned we'd have these big blocky buildings, that's not what this is. So
Thank you.
Don't
all
see any
right.
questions.
Well,
Oops.
I was just going to make one comment. Just when I think we received a copy of this afternoon, and one of the things I noted, and just for us, but also maybe for the public who might be listening or watching this later, I think when I counted the number of floors, there are 2 11-story buildings and 2 9-story buildings. So it's not as obvious in this diagram as the one that I think we were provided as an attachment to the letter. And I think that also sort of helps frame. So just want to share that.
Thanks for that. What are the L?
I think those are the levels. I think those are the floors. And so there's a below the podium floor that's the street level. And so I had interpreted that as essentially 13 stories from the podium. But yes, that they are not 18 story, they're not basically the height that 250 feet could accommodate is definitely the case. And we can get some clarification on that as well. Like I said, this was relatively late breaking, but we thought it was helpful to the discussion.
Yeah, and I only brought it up because this is only conceptual, obviously, but just there's a big difference between imagining an 18-story building, or I think a lot of folks are imagining I think downtown Bellevue is 450 feet, so the tallest building. So a lot of people are, it's if you're not thinking a lot about it, you're thinking Bellevue. Well, those are 450-foot towers, and I don't know how many stories that are, but those are 30, 40 stories. Here we're talking about something on the order of 10, 11, 12, 13 stories. So I just think it helps conceptualize it.
Councilmember Nixon.
Yeah, and most of the existing tall buildings in downtown Bellevue are 40 stories, but they've authorized 3 new 60-story buildings, one of which is under construction now. So it does give you a very different visual impression. Yeah.
And we can get clarification on the stories at the next meeting.
Great.
Okay, so Allison, next slide, please. So what we wanted to talk about is the community benefit categories that are being negotiated, which are the categories you're talking about in the incentive zoning as well. But what we're talking about is a substantial affordable housing cash contribution substantial open space and trail investments, a very large plaza, a bike and pedestrian trail that'll run parallel to 405, improved at a level that's well beyond what we could require of them in the code. They are planning a variety of enhanced sustainability investments in their structure, and they are required to do transportation and utility mitigation projects, basically, that they will be building some major intersection infrastructure and doing a lot of improvements along their frontage to meet the form-based code requirements. And so when we talk about the incentive zoning a little bit later, we can kind of talk about conceptually the difference between what you might get at 150 and 250, but you will be getting substantially more information shortly about what's being proposed in the development agreement that will give you, I think, a better order of scale, but we're still sort of in the fine-tuning process of coming to agreement on the numbers and things of that nature. But they are significant, and they are beyond what the form-based code would require. They do exceed what we would require of them as part of the code. So we just wanted to provide that for context. And then I think there's one more slide that just talks about what some of the key areas of the development agreement are. There's a description of the project, a discussion of how they would get their entitlements and what they would be subject to, what's in the code, definition of those public benefits, how they vest in development regulations, any deviations from the zoning standards, a process for amending the agreement, how they're going to phase the project, specifically what infrastructure improvements they're going to construct, how that affects capital facilities charges, which are the utilities infrastructure charges and impact fees, how concurrency, signage, parking, and other transportation items will work, and then essentially the term of the agreement. And so it's a document of something on the order of 20 to 25 pages with a lot of exhibits. But what we're trying to do, again, kind of back to the original intent, is to give them some certainty to what we think will work on the site, but also to give us some certainty about what the public benefits will be and how the process will work for a development of this scale. So I think that's the final slide I have on the development agreement before I turn it back to Allison. So any other questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Tracy. So 2 questions. I assume when we look at this development agreement, we'll also get some elevations, some schematics, so the public can actually see what this is going to look like, particularly the park and open space.
Yeah, there's site plan exhibits that give different views of how this is spaced out and what's in between those buildings.
Perfect. And then also, there has been a comment, because we all have been listening closely to the public, about paying in lieu fees for affordable housing. As part of that conversation, we'll talk about our ARCH relationship and how those in lieu fees are used in the city of Kirkland.
We will, and we have confirmed that we can direct that those be invested in the station area.
Okay.
And so that is something that we can basically make a condition on the trust fund. Again, recognizing that we're hoping and expecting that there'll be affordable housing projects that will be applying for funding.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other discussion?
See, Deputy Mayor Arnold has his hand up.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Tracy. This is really exciting that Google's at a point to be able to share some of the discussions that have been happening with their particular plans. A couple things that I want to make sure that get covered when we talk about the development agreement, just to give you a heads up. From a transportation standpoint, I don't know the timing of the development agreement, but part of what we're doing with our station area planning is planning for bus rapid transit that would begin service in 2027 with a 405 interchange that would support bus rapid transit being built in 2026. If this particular project is looking at occupancy before those dates, I definitely will want to be looking at what's the interim transportation plan and what Google is doing for their particular mode split on that. So I hope we'll get some information moving forward on that.
Sure.
Secondly, one of the things that was, well, thinking back to Kirkland Urban and the village at Totem Lake, one of the things that helped a lot during those processes is that the developer was able to have some community meetings sharing their plans and answering questions. Is there any way we could get Google to do some sort of open house or other community meeting in July where they could talk about these plans in more detail? I think that might address some of the concerns that the Planning Commission had brought up at saying we want to have more discussion, more opportunity for community input before any council decision on this.
We can certainly talk with them about it, and they have made some community presentations up to this point in time, I think, to some of the neighborhood associations and all. So I think they may have some materials that they're comfortable sharing. So we'll reach out and ask them about that.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Anything else on the development agreement?
I see nothing.
Great. So I will turn it back to Allison for the moment.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to spend the next few minutes just digging into a little bit of detail around schools, because we have heard so much from the community, and because it was also a large subject, a subject that Planning Commission discussed during their deliberations last week. So I just wanted to lay out a few ways that we're addressing the school question in phase 1 of the station area, and then talk about what we're going to continue to work on when we talk about the phase 2 code amendments here in the remainder of the year. So the council's already discussed, and we've talked a little bit about that the draft comprehensive plan you'll be considering for adoption next week does include policies that direct us to increase development capacity on those existing school sites, to create a bonus incentive program. We're going to hear a little bit about that later tonight. And then also policies that talk about fostering those partnerships between the district and the city and the private sector. Just listing here the Planning Commission recommendation for an amendment that Chair Rosman discussed with you earlier. And then lastly, regarding what is included for schools in the draft form-based code you'll be considering next week, I want to make sure it's clear that the draft form-based code under consideration next week is for the commercial mixed-use district only. That district does not allow residential uses, so we don't expect that as a result of the zoning for the commercial mixed-use district, we're going to get direct student generation from the commercial uses we'll see in those in that zoning district. But what we are doing in that zoning district is allowing those educational uses as something that would be allowed in active or retail frontages. So really being liberal with where potential school uses or daycare uses could be allowed throughout the district, including in that commercial district. And then also the incentive zoning program included in the draft form-based code does include educational spaces as an incentive option that someone could earn development capacity through. For phase 2, this is when we'll talk about the remainder of the station area districts, and these districts all will allow residential uses, so they will have a direct impact on student generation with future growth. And also, one of the phase 2 districts we'll be looking at and discussing the actual form-based code for is that civic mixed-use district, which is what we've applied to the Lake Washington High School site. So we'll actually be talking about the zoning and how we increase development capacity specifically on that site. And council already, in the preferred plan direction you adopted at the end of last year, directed us to increase the allowed height on that site up to 75 feet for certain portions. Additionally, we expect that educational uses will continue to be allowed in that active retail frontages we'll see throughout the district. And it will also be included in the incentive zoning program applied to the remainder of the districts. That the way that we structure it in the incentive zoning program for the other districts, the phase 2 districts, could be the same as what we've done for the commercial mixed use district structure, or it could be different. So we'll be discussing that with phase 2. Additionally, we've already talked a little bit tonight about the Planning Commission work program item to evaluate increasing development capacity on school sites citywide. And we have begun preliminary work on that in-house. So you'll be hearing more about that as we move forward as well. And for this last one, I'm going to hand it back over to Tracy to talk about some of the ways that we're working on supporting schools through the station area plan work.
Yes, and this just highlights a few of the things that I think were summarized in the school issue paper that we're working on. And then I'll share with you an email that I got from the school district earlier today with a little more perspective as well about where we are. So one of the things that was identified in there as part of our partnership is to really look at pursuing properties that are at least in proximity to the station area that could serve multiple uses, including a school. And I think the one that is probably of most interest at the moment and most imminent is the Houghton Park and Ride, which the Washington State Department of Transportation did declare surplus. We've expressed our interest through their process, and I believe we are still awaiting the appraisal, which is part of that process. But our intent is if we are successful in acquiring that, then we'll begin in earnest talking about uses, and I think that is of great interest to the school district. The other thing that we think we can work very effectively in partnership on is trying to pursue legislative changes that recognize the changing needs of schools in the urban areas to basically maybe provide more flexibility of how they can use their capital funds, because right now they have to buy things. They can't use those for long-term leases. And if you're talking about particularly trying to co-locate with a commercial building, you'd have to create a condominium interest, which has been done, but not all developers would be interested in doing that. And so trying to give some flexibility that if it's a long-term lease, it's essentially equivalent perhaps to a capital investment that would be a purchase. We do have school impact fees, and we have estimates based on what the current fees are, or with some inflation in there, but it's something that the school district updates every year, I think, as they update their capital facilities plan, or every couple of years. That's based on what they're actually intending to spend district-wide, and that would be available as the development occurs from residential development, because that's basically collected from residential. Those school impact fees are on residential development. But there's also new assessed valuation that's generated due to the redevelopment on the school portion of the property tax levy. And working back and forth with the district, it's a substantial amount of money potentially over the period of the station area. Obviously, it doesn't all come in at once because the development will occur over the period that we're doing for the planning. But there'll be some funding that is brought to bear, but that also goes into their overall capital planning process. And so I think what Allison was describing in terms of flexibility was to create opportunities, but these are opportunities that then need to be looked at in a broader context. And I know in our conversations with the district, they're moving from a whole different essentially frame of reference when they think about urbanizing, underground parking, for example. But if you're trading that off against having to acquire property, the cost might be equivalent in these kinds of areas. And so what I wanted to do as the last piece is just read you a couple of the comments that the school district sent. They basically talked about that we've been working collaboratively over the past year and that they've been monitoring what's happening with the station area plan. And they just put a couple of bullet points. We appreciate the continued discussions towards zoning code updates to increase flexibility and options for school district projects across the city, because they do look at it not only citywide, but district-wide, which includes the other cities that are part of the district. We're glad to see that the issue paper mentions the Houghton Park and Ride as a potential shared use with a school component. The property is one we've previously discussed with city staff as a potential site for school capacity, and a partnership would be welcome. We appreciate the city's willingness to work together on legislative changes that provide additional flexibility with regard to use of capital funds. At the same time, Current law provides us the ability to use capital dollars to purchase a condo facility, and we'd appreciate further consideration of how commercial development may facilitate such a capacity solution. And then the last thing they basically acknowledged, and so there are more discussions to be had about how this all fits together, and I think that's one thing we wanted to highlight, but we acknowledge that the city is working toward options that'll help the school district, and we have a desire to continue the coordination on the partnerships and to work closely and collaboratively with staff on additional challenges. And this last part is why I wanted to read it. We would be happy to provide comments at a future public hearing or participate in meetings as necessary. And so if you want to have a conversation further with the school district, we could certainly invite them to the meeting on the 28th to have more dialogue with you if you have questions. And I think, they'd be willing to do that. That's how they close the email. And so I think there is opportunity to have more conversation with them, and we are actively involved. The one thing that wasn't on any of these is we really have also facilitated them having conversations with Google, and they've been having those conversations, and now those conversations have sort of moved between the school district and Google, less with our involvement, but they are actively talking. So I think that ends our school slides, and the next piece is about the incentive zoning, where I'll talk about schools again, but any questions for us on the school piece?
I see none.
Okay. So first I wanted to introduce our consultant, our economist, Michael Hodgins. He is on the line to answer questions if they come up. He's I think I said this the last time, but he's kind of my phone a friend if you ask me questions that get too far into the economics part of this. But what the next few slides do is just give you a few reminders of the conversations you've had to date about the incentive zoning and try to address some of the comments and questions that have come up through not only the Planning Commission deliberations, but just through the conversations and the comments that we've been getting so far. Just a reminder that analytically there were 3 main questions we answered. We looked at how much will this particular upzoning create in value for the private property that's being rezoned. How much of that value is being used to meet the base requirements? And that was one of the big things that needed to be determined before we could design the incentive zoning structure, is what were we going to include in the base? And the key things that are in the base are the new infrastructure requirements, but also compliance with the high-performing building code, which was adopted earlier this year, and achieving a minimum green factor score of 0.4, which is defined in some of the materials that you've been presented earlier. And so many of those elements are things that go beyond what's in the current code. So some of the value that's created is being used in things they have to do. That's basically what number 2 is. And then what's left is the third question. What's left to support a functional incentive zoning program? And I'll probably make this point a couple of times in here that an incentive zoning program is voluntary. If you want the additional height, you provide the community benefits to sort of earn that height, but it is voluntary. And so one of the reasons we had an economist work on it is you have to understand the development economics, not only of any individual type of development, but looking at the area, like who are your competitors? And Bellevue happens to be a competitor that has an incentive zoning structure, and so we were able to kind of calibrate against that and some of the work that Seattle does. So with that as a backdrop, the next slide just is a reminder of what the categories are of community benefits in the CMU zone. So affordable housing is a payment, a cash payment, because we're not allowing residential in the commercial mixed-use zone, so they can't build it. But we have affordable housing as a payment. We have enhanced mid-block green connections, and so beyond what they're required to do as part of the code for those mid-block connections. The provision of both outdoor and indoor parks and open space facilities, sustainability investments, which is also linked to the green factor, but linked to other types of investments that the developer might make in sustainability. Again, returning to schools, we had presented earlier in one of the earlier presentations something that showed that the value of the space of trying to dedicate a school plate, a plate of a building for a school, would use up much or more than the upzoning that we're providing here. But in our conversations with the school district, there are smaller spaces that they believe would also be valuable. They have some requirements to provide early childhood education, that if they were able to move it out of existing schools and into a separate space, they might be able to reprogram that space in the existing schools. Similarly, there's value to them in other kinds of operational space, perhaps aside from classrooms, so administrative space, meeting space, things of that nature. And so in this commercial mixed-use zone, what we've put in is an option for those kinds of facilities in the buildings. And then we added a last category that is basically something that the applicant could propose as a community benefit, because we're trying to think of things that we can identify, size, and calibrate that we know about, but there might be some things that a particular site or a particular developer might be able to do that the community would value. So those are the major categories in that incentive zoning. And if we go to the next slide, we get more and more numbers, and so I apologize in advance. But I just wanted to speak briefly about how the exchange rates are determined and why calibrating it is important. And I touched on a few of those points. What we're basically trying to do is equate an investment in an amenity into square feet that you can build, essentially square feet that you can build above 85 feet. And we presented a number of different ways of doing it, but what we looked at is costs or relative values of investing here and what's being done in Bellevue and Seattle. And so I guess where I would take your eyes on this very busy numbers chart, which is followed by an even busier numbers chart, is I think a question that I've heard asked a number of times is, how much amenity are we going to get? So what we tried to do, what Michael did for us, was say, for 20,000 feet of space, what would we get from this structure? So to earn 20,000 square feet of incentive zoning space, basically if you're doing it without waiting, doing affordable housing without waiting, you would get a payment of $500,000. If you did the weighting structure, you would get a lower payment, but you were more likely for the developer to voluntarily choose affordable housing. So under option 3, which we talked about the last time, you get less cash, but you get more likelihood of the developer choosing that amenity. Similarly, for 20,000 square feet of earned incentive space, you would get 4,000 square feet of enhanced mid-block green connections. You can see the square footage there for the parks and open space. Sustainability is a little bit trickier because it's hard to basically come up with a square footage measurement. We're having them build things in some of those other categories so you can relate space for space. And so we use sort of an investment component based on some of the work that was done by the sustainability consultants and Michael. Similarly, for 20,000 feet of incentive zoning space, you could get 2,000 square feet for daycare. And then the flexible amenity, again, is sort of open-ended, but we did that on a dollar basis, similar to the investments that are made in sustainability. So what we're hoping is by showing you this, it takes a little bit of the complexity of the examples and the options out, but basically just tries to say, you get to build more space if you do this. So if you build 4,000 square feet of enhanced mid-block green connections or pay us $500,000 toward affordable housing. So hopefully this not particularly simple table, but more simplified table than what you saw previously, just kind of gives some context, because I'm going to return to the table that you saw previously. And again, the reason calibration is important is because Bellevue is also looking to attract this kind of development. And what we want is people to do this and provide the amenities. So we don't want to make it so cost prohibitive that they look elsewhere to do the development. All right. Next slide, Allison. Okay, so just to break up the numbers. This is what we presented to you, I believe, the last time in terms of options, the policy questions about how to structure an incentive zoning program. You can basically have a list and not give any preference to any amenity, and so the applicant has maximum flexibility. That's the single tier. We showed a two-tier option that basically said, for our example, tier 1 for the first 20 feet, you have to make an affordable housing payment. And then after that, you can choose from the amenities for additional height after that first 20 feet. And so that's a two-tiered option. And then option 3, which I think you expressed some preference for, was a single-tiered option. So basically the developer can choose any of those amenities, but they are incentivized because they have to pay less or do less for certain higher priority investments. And so what we put in the packet was a more robust example of what option 3 looks like, a single tier with weighting, and even a single tier where you could potentially do all affordable housing, you could do a mix, you could do all sustainability. It's, again, maximum flexibility to the applicant, but there's some signal in there of what's most important, but you get a little bit less on those weighted amenities. And so the Planning Commission's recommendation, I think, tended to look more like tier 2, given the importance of affordable housing, because that ensures affordable housing is the first thing that they can choose to gain access to the rest where they have more choice and flexibility. And I think I said the last time, and there are an infinite number of permutations. You could have a two-tier program and weight what's in the second tier. In response to a question that I think the city manager got, we could have affordable housing in both the first and the second tier of a two-tiered program, that you have to do a certain amount of affordable housing for the first 20 feet, but then you could have more affordable housing in the list of options. And so I think that's what we're hoping to get your feedback and comments on today, so that we can bring you back the program that you want. The other thing I would say is that this is somewhat speculative. The development is not here yet. Do you know what I mean? Even the earliest developments will probably not occur that soon. And so you have the opportunity to fine-tune it if you find you're not getting what you need as the development occurs. This isn't a one-and-done type of thing. You can revisit it over time, and revisit it over time as conditions change. And the example I'd give is what people do for sustainability today is something you would have had to incentivize 10 years ago. What will happen 10 years from now or 5 years from now might be entirely different. And so you are not locked in to doing this and only this. And we have the ability to sort of tinker with it if we're not getting what we think we're looking for. So I think on to the next slide for the moment. There's the busy table for the other one.
If I may, can we go back to the previous slide?
Okay.
I think we are definitely interested in the council's discussion on the sort of option 3 versus option 2, given the planning commission discussion, or maybe was that a slide that's coming up?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay. No, that's true. And I wasn't going to go into the busy chart, but what I wanted to do is, again, I had kind of pulled for my presentation last time this first line out, and I wanted to just kind of focus on that first line again. That the main difference between option 2 and option 3 is, for affordable housing, you could get 0 in option 3, but by weighting it, you're giving them incentive. They can get more incentive space for less investment because of the weighting side of it. So when you compare the two, option 2, 50,000 square feet for a payment of 1.25 million. If you look at the numbers in option 3, you would only get $830,000 in payment for 50,000 square feet because you're weighting that higher. But that is an incentive to the developer to choose that. So the reason I put this back up is I still think that's probably the most relevant example, because I think what we heard from the Planning Commission, and I think one reason we modeled option 2 the way we did, we've heard from you that affordable housing is a high, if not the highest priority amenity in the station area. So that's all I was going to talk about on this one. And so what we tried to do is take all the numbers and make it a little more illustrative. So there were examples of option 3 in there, but we were trying to answer a couple of questions with this. Again, taking the diagrams that we used in concept and putting them more into reality. For a 150-foot building, there's the base zoning, so all the things the developer has to do in that first 85 feet, which is the lowest block, the blue block. And then this just illustrates that they could do different things depending on what the structure is and depending on what they choose. They could do a combination on the left of all of the above, all of the amenities, or they could do a lot of just a couple of the amenities, or even in some cases one of them. And what we wanted to try to illustrate just in concept is to try to start getting at the answer of how much more do you get in amenities between 150 feet and 250 feet. And sort of in scale, this gives you a sense it's substantially more, and we'll be able to give you a more real example when we talk about the development agreement, because we'll be able to look at what would they have had to do to get 150 feet versus what we're getting in addition to it for the 250 feet. We're just not quite to the point where we can share the numbers yet, but our hope is that we can show you something like this that will give you a more tangible example of what you're getting between 150 and 250 feet. So hopefully that's a helpful piece. Oh, go back. You were right, City Manager. I think if we go back maybe to that slide, thank you. What we really are looking for is sort of whether you have further questions or thoughts on the option 2 versus option 3, and any other questions that you want to talk about at this point for what we'll bring back for the code for adoption on potential adoption on the 28th.
Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for the graphics as opposed to the chart. I always appreciate that. So I just want to clarify, the Planning Commission has said it, this council has said it, affordable housing is our #1 priority. My understanding is we already require 10% affordable housing in our base.
For residential.
For residential, not for commercial.
Correct.
So it will not carry over. Okay, that was what I was confused about. But this incentive, we are only talking about phase 1. We're going to have a whole nother discussion with phase 2, correct?
That's correct. And I think in phase 2, we've heard you and agree that performance is what you're looking for in phase 2, which is going to be the residential piece. You want units in the station area.
Right.
And so that's why I kind of put that example in of if you had a 2-tiered structure, they would still be required to do what's in the base currently. Then they could get the next 20 feet by building additional units or doing larger units or units that have a deeper level of affordability. And then if you did a 2-tiered structure, you could also have a second tier where they could do even more on a performance basis, or they make a cash payment. But there's no requirement that you allow an in lieu of payment for that first, or
Right.
for the first increment. And
Right.
so I think that is staff's recommendation, is that we would make performance by building the units what the requirement would be as part of phase 2.
Okay.
But that is a discussion that is probably one of the focal points in phase 2 is.
Okay. And when we come back with phase 2, planning ahead, we've already adopted an affordable housing dashboard with metrics that we want to meet at 80%, 50%, 30% AMI. So we'll bring that into that conversation as we start looking at the incentives.
Sure.
Okay. So colleagues, I was in favor of option 3 specifically for phase 1 because I felt like it gave us the flexibility, and we still were the affordable housing isn't going to be built in this area. So I'm still leaning towards option 3, but I can easily be convinced by my colleagues to go for option 2. The other question that's not about affordable housing is, in reading the white paper, it talked about how the green factor is not difficult for developers to meet. So my question is, should we increase that green factor, or did I misunderstand that?
We did increase in the earlier versions of the proposal, and Allison and others can make sure I get this right. It was at 0.6, so 0.4 is in the base code, and 0.6 was the incentive, but then Allison and Michael and the other consultants ran some scenarios, and 0.6 seemed like it might be too easy.
Yeah.
And so we raised it in the draft form-based code to 0.75.
Okay.
From 0.6, which we think is more aggressive.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I agree with Councilmember Curtis. My lens with this stationary plan, first and foremost, is how can we increase affordable housing here? How can we get the most affordable housing possible? We know that this is one of the biggest issues facing our community, facing our region. And so for me, that is top priority. You've heard me say before that we really need to be bold in what we do here around affordable housing. So thank you, Planning Commission, for just reminding us of that. I think that's really, really important that we keep that first and foremost. I know that, all of us here share that similar lens, that we really care about affordable housing. My understanding, similar to Councilmember Curtis, I wanted to confirm my understanding. This is just phase 1, phase 2. We have opportunity. I don't believe we've yet really discussed what the base requirement will be for affordable housing under phase 2. So my understanding is we'll still have that conversation yet to come, in addition to perhaps incentivizing, but we haven't discussed whether we want to increase the base requirement there as well, which is a conversation I'd really like us to have and be bold there as well. Another opportunity for us to be bold, in addition to the conversation we're having here tonight about phase 1. And Tracy, if I'm understanding you correctly, it seems as if comparing options 2 and 3, and I've been thinking a lot leading into our last meeting and since our last meeting about comparing options 2 and 3. So I really appreciate this discussion and your presentation here tonight. But that with option 2, it's bolder, right? It would both require affordable housing to be the community benefit that a builder utilizes or selects first, and also would get us more affordable housing in that initial incentivized height. However, there's the risk that a builder might not want to do it at all. It might be too steep a cost, right? And so going back to my former comments about my lens around affordable housing and wanting to be bold, and considering your comments earlier as well about how we can revisit this at a later time, I think it would be a lot harder to go back and be bolder, right? If we're finding that, it's too easy for developers to go through this, right? That we're not having any problems with them wanting to build under our current incentivized structure. It would be harder for us to go back if we had option 3 and make stricter requirements and require additional affordable housing fee in lieu under the option 2 structure. But so I would prefer that we start with option 2. That's the bolder choice for us to really put ourselves out there and try to get more affordable housing fee in lieu here. And if we find out that that's not working, it's too high of a threshold, as you said, Tracy, we can go back and examine it at a later time. So after a lot of consideration, I strongly prefer option 2. I think it's the bolder option that will give us more affordable housing. That's what our main priority is here. And if we realize later that it's a mistake, it's a lot easier to shift from option 2 to option 3 than it would be to change from option 3 to option 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Tracy, for the slides and the explanation here. It really helps. Just for the discussion, when we talk about phase 1 versus phase 2, phase 1 is the commercial mixed use incentives, and phase two is the other incentives, including the residential pieces. And when I think about this, and the reason why I was originally talking about option 3 last time was it was specific to the commercial mixed use. And when we think about the intensity of development that's possible within the commercial mixed use, I want to make sure that we are having multiple significant community benefits. And that's why I looked at the policy weighting option to allow some of that flexibility. I agree affordable housing is important, but I think that becomes more important or more, I think that delivery of it becomes more of a priority when we talk about phase 2 and what are the requirements around residential construction, where we can actually have units being built on site, integrated within other units. And that's where I would support a 2-tier requirement as part of phase 2. I don't think it's necessary in the commercial areas. And so if we have that kind of flexibility, would support the policy weighting for the commercial areas and then have the residential discussion in more detail as part of phase 2.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Tracy, for the presentation. One thing that I was going to say, but it's actually been said here by you and by all of us, is that we're going to have another opportunity we're going to have other opportunities to make adjustments if we don't get this right. It has been a concern of mine from the very beginning. I really like the creativity in these proposals, but I'm also worried that I tell you my biggest concern. My biggest concern is that we get all of one and none of the others. And I don't, in some ways, whether it's a bunch of plazas and no affordable housing, or even honestly, all affordable housing, which is definitely my priority along with mine, but no open space, no third spaces, no plazas. So what I've been, I guess I'm echoing a little bit, I think, what I heard from Deputy Mayor, which is like one of my big concerns is that we don't get this right and we get all of one. And that's why I was kind of favoring option 3, was it felt to me like there was a greater likelihood we were going to get that mix of different monumental public benefits. One thing, a question I asked the city manager, I don't know if he passed it on to you, but was this idea, and I don't know if this completely messes up the whole weighting structure, but the idea that you would have the weighting structure, but on top of it, you would throw down a thin layer that says, but you have to provide at least 2 public amenities. So you can't just do, even as much as we all like sustainability or plazas, an open space or affordable housing, you have to do 2 things. Did you have a chance to explore that, and how badly does that mess up the algorithm?
I don't think it messes it up at all. I think it's really a question of how you might want to structure it. If it's 2 and any 2, you could use either 2 tiers or 1 tier, or either option 3 or option 2, by basically saying that you can't get more than 75% of the bonus height from any one category, for example. If you had a concern about any given amenity category, you could also say you can't get more than X% from that category, which would then force you to pick from one or more of the other categories. So I think it can be accommodated. I think probably the simplest is to say you can only get, I think the number, I talked with Michael a little bit about what he thought would work from a project standpoint, and he said you can't get more than 75% of the incentive height from any one category, was one way you could look at it, because not every site will be able to accommodate all the amenities. Smaller sites aren't going to have the land to potentially do what some of the bigger sites are doing. But to basically say sustainability elements and affordable housing, or space consuming ones like a plaza or those kinds of things, that way you would ensure that you at least got some of two if you did that. I think if you made it too small an increment, you might make it so that an individual property might be too constrained by that. Do you know what I mean? If you even if you said 50%, that might be too constraining to an individual development. But I do think it's fairly simple, and it's not a huge change to the code to say that you have to choose amenities in at least two categories to qualify for the space.
Okay. That's helpful. I don't know that any of my colleagues have had a chance to like really even think about that, or whether it solves any of the concerns they have. It just reminds me again just how complex this is, and how easily there's many ways in which we could mess this up. We could get none of the development at all that we're looking for, none of the public benefits we're looking for at all. Or we get way too much of one thing and nothing of other. So I guess ends up, aside from my touchstone of the prioritizing getting attainable housing in the station area and making this a district where people can live where they work and work where they live, including family wage or low wage jobs that provide the great services that we're all looking for in all of our commercial districts. Aside from that, it's this recurring concern that we're gonna miss it on one of these and not get the public benefit that we're really looking for. So that'll be my other touchstone. I'm not sure.
One thought I had while you were talking was that, interestingly, for the commercial mixed-use zone, the biggest single development site is also the site we're looking at for the development agreement, and that's part of why we're doing it, is to make sure we're getting a mix, because it has the opportunity to provide all of the above in some ways. And that's why I think maybe that will be helpful to see as well, and might help inform how you look at it moving forward into phase two. Because the other thing that we might be able to do is, as you have the phase two discussion, we can always tweak what we're doing in phase one, either to make them consistent or to make them different if that's what you decide based on your deliberations there. Because I think there's a whole lot more properties with unique potential requirements in phase two compared to what we have here, where these are big, for the most part, or at least the two on the east side of the freeway are large parcels that have a lot of ability to essentially be catalyst projects, right? And that's, I think, why we were really encouraging a development agreement to ensure we're getting the mix. I don't know if that helps, but I think
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm intrigued with Councilmember Black's revised version of option 3. I think, like everyone, looking at the graphs and looking at I don't know how to pick a winner in this one. We all want housing. We all do want, we want these properties to develop in ways that accomplish all the goals that we've set out there. What do you pick? So I guess right now I'm still leaning towards option 3 with potentially the optional options.
So I think maybe we could bring back a version of option 3 that also requires that you have at least 2 amenity categories, because that would start, I think, to address some of the concerns.
Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to follow up. Thank you, Councilmember Black, for that idea. I'm also really intrigued by it. I think it's a great idea. I like the idea of, saying that you can't get more than 75% of the additional upzoning in any one category. I'm wondering, Councilmember Black, you mentioned that your concerns with option 2 are that you're concerned that we may get just one kind of community benefit. Given the feasibility of your idea, which is a great idea, Do you feel like that would work in conjunction with option 2? Would that alleviate your concerns that you expressed with option 2?
I think the answer is not entirely, because I think with what gives me pause about option 2 is that a developer could choose, in fact, they could choose just to always, and again, affordable housing, attainable housing being the number one priority, but they could choose every time just to do attainable housing. And what we'll get is a district, what we potentially could get from private development is a district that has none of the open spaces, none of the walkthrough, can't remember what we call it, but, basically pedestrian friendly, walkable. We could miss out on all that because we've prioritized, because they have to do attainable housing. And I know that runs counter to the instinct. My instinct, especially after you, Councilmember Falcone, you and Councilmember Curtis spoke, my instinct was, I appreciate the Planning Commission's reminding us of that, and something we've been talking about all along, but it's so important. But I also wonder if we're going to, with option 2, we're potentially not going to get the type of district that's going to be livable and walkable for the people who are going to be living in the attainable housing that we might incentivize.
Thank you. That's helpful clarification. I want to make sure I'm understanding your proposal then, because I may have misunderstood it. I was seeing it as 75% of the upzoning that a developer chooses to utilize would have to be at least 25% to a different community benefit, right? Like of the 100% of the community benefit pool that they were going to be utilizing, they couldn't give 100% to something. Am I misunderstanding that? It sounds like, based on what you're saying, that it's of the 100% total possible upzoning, that only 75%. Because I think if it's the former, right, then we'll always get at least 2 types of community benefit. Even if it's 75% affordable housing, we'll always have at least 25% some other community benefit. Can you clarify? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yep, I just wanted to make sure I had the mayor's permission to speak. So I realize it's a study session, so it's probably a little more open. I think, Councilmember Falcone, I think that it's just really a question, I guess, of how much complexity we want to add to it, right? Because I can imagine something that is now a hybrid. It's the now Black Falcone hybrid version of it, which is option 3, with a requirement that you have to pick from 2 amenities, and one of those amenities has to be attainable housing.
Which is more like option 2.
Which starts looking a little bit like option 2, admittedly, and so it's a hybrid between option 2, option 3. But I guess, Tracy, does any of that make sense? And
I think I want to try to repeat
are we overthinking
Councilmember Falcone's question, because I think it's a really interesting question, and I'll tell you how I interpreted it for what it's worth. Is I think what you were saying is it 75% of the max they could ask for, so that if they asked for less than the max, they could do all one category? Or is it 75% of what they ask for? So if they only want, maybe they can ask for 1 million square feet, but they only want 700,000. Of that 700,000, 75% would need to be in one category and 25% would be in the other. That's how I interpreted what you were saying, Councilmember Black. And I think that's workable. Allison or Michael or anybody, wave your arms if I'm not saying that. But I think that's more workable, because I think you could get the unintended consequence that I think Councilmember Falcone was teeing up, which is they could say, well, I could get this much and it would be 75, 25, but I'm only going to ask for the 75 part. So it's all in how you write it, I guess. So that's our challenge of how we write the language. But I think it's doable to require 2 categories.
And I was just going to say that my idea was, Tracy, your idea. So if that helps Councilmember Falcone understand better.
Deputy Mayor Arnold.
One of the other concerns that I have, thinking about an affordable housing requirement in the commercial mixed-use district, is we're talking about fee in lieu. And so the realization of those community benefits is going to be delayed given fee in lieu contribution and then Arch's ability to do something with that. That's in contrast to the neighborhood mixed use areas where whatever affordable housing requirement we have actually will result in housing benefit immediately as part of that development. And so for the commercial mixed use area, suddenly we would have a good, by having an affordable housing requirement, have some of that public benefit that is delayed and indirect. Whereas for everything else we're talking about here, whether it's parks and open space or connections or school space or demonstration of some really cool sustainability stuff, we see that benefit immediately. And that's why I really do lean towards option 3 for the commercial area. Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
She thought we were done. She's looking at the clock. No, thank you, Deputy Mayor Arnold. I'm with Deputy Mayor Arnold. I think option 3 is the right way to go. It will provide us the public benefits that the public, frankly, is asking for now. And I will remind everybody that in option 3, affordable housing is weighted so that it's a higher priority. So I think that we risk making this too complicated. And I would like to stay with option 3.
So maybe just to clarify, but you're interested in the 2 amenity amendment?
Yes.
Or, oh, okay.
Yes, absolutely. So just
Okay.
I actually am interested.
say that versus the Falcone black hybrid that would be 2 amenities where one is required to be affordable housing. Thanks.
Did that just get confusing?
I was gonna look to the city manager because
So-
he does such a great job of.
So my suggestion, I think, is that we can bring you several options for how to get to that 2 requirement, and then you can finalize them on the 28th. But I think as long as we know you want option 3, and as long as we know you want no less than 2 of the amenities, I think we can give you a couple options that I think can meet your needs. And I will say that I think what you'll find when we bring back the development agreement is I think we meet the intention of all of this conversation as well. So I think it will be helpful. I think we're going to be in a good place for all the documents, but we might bring you 1 or 2 options to vote on when you get to the 28th that tries to address that.
Sounds great. Council? Good to go.
Great. Okay, and we have one more slide that's next steps that I'll turn back to Allison.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the discussion tonight, council members. So just to cover next steps, as we've mentioned several times tonight, you have a special meeting next Tuesday evening to consider adoption of those phase 1 documents we went over earlier. And then a public hearing is scheduled for July 6th for council to receive public testimony on the development agreement for the Lee Johnson site. And then we'll be picking up phase 2 work shortly thereafter this year. And that's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Allison. Brilliant work. Your ability to keep us on track is amazing to me. So with that, we will adjourn and we will return back to our regular business meeting at 7:30. Thank you. We are back in session following an 85th Street Station Area Plan discussion. We are at item 4, Honors and Proclamations. Our our only proclamation this evening is our Ride Transit Month proclamation, and Councilmember Curtis is going to help me with this while the city manager introduces it.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll be proclaiming June as Ride Transit Month in Kirkland, Washington. We will be joining regional transit agencies and active transportation organizations around the region to encourage alternatives to driving. And this is our inaugural year of doing this proclamation as coordinated by the Transportation Choices Coalition. And we are pleased tonight to have the Executive Director, Alex Hudson, from Transportation Choices here to receive the proclamation.
Thank you. Proclaiming June 2022 as Ride Transit Month in Kirkland, Washington. Whereas transit is an economical, healthy, and environmentally sound transportation mode that can be used to access local destinations, workplaces, and other businesses. And whereas the City Council has adopted balanced transportation as one of its council goals to reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles and improve connectivity and multimodal mobility in Kirkland, and whereas the City Council adopted the city's first transportation master plan in November 2015 and transit implementation plan in March 2019, both of which have the goal of enhancing the speed, reliability, and accessibility of transit for all users. And whereas the city provides a free ORCA card for all benefited city employees through the ORCA Business Passport program to encourage employees to use transit. And whereas the Washington State Department of Transportation and Sound Transit will soon construct the I-405 Northeast 85th Street interchange and inline Stride bus rapid transit station to be served by Sound Transit Regional Express bus service and I-405 Stride BRT between Bellevue and Linwood by 2027. And whereas the city is engaging in a once-in-a-generation land use and economic development planning to leverage 85th and I-405 bus rapid station to create a welcoming and inclusive neighborhood of innovation and sustainability that will link transit access, jobs, parks, open space, and affordable housing. And whereas the Washington State Legislature passed the transformational Move Ahead Washington Transportation Package in March 2022, which will make our state's transportation system safer and more convenient and more accessible for transit riders. And whereas regional transit agencies and active transportation organizations are promoting June as Ride Transit Month to encourage alternatives to driving. Now, therefore, Mayor Penny Sweet, on behalf of the City Council, does hereby proclaim June as Ride Transit Month in Kirkland, Washington, signed the 21st day of June, 2022.
My name is Alex Hudson, and I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition and a proud Eastside resident. I grew up in Redmond, and as a transit rider my whole life, I really counted a lot on public transit and spent quite a bit of time at the Kirkland Transit Center waiting for transfers. I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of the thousands of people in Kirkland who count on public transit as a safe, accessible, and affordable way to get around. The work that you're doing and the recognition of this makes the lives better of young people like me and out there today who are counting on these services. So this is a really important thing that makes people's lives better, and we're very grateful.
Thank you so much. Okay, that takes us to item number 5, communications. Before we move into our next agenda item, I wanted to briefly recognize the outstanding work of our Finance and Administration Department staff. The Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, recently announced that the city received a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our annual comprehensive financial report for the fiscal year that ended December the 31st, 2020. In order to be awarded this Certificate of Achievement, the city had to publish an easily readable and efficiently organized report that satisfied both generally accepted accounting principles and applicable legal requirements. This is the 17th consecutive year that the City of Kirkland has been awarded this recognition. Accountability and transparency are key values of this city. This council, like the councils before it, takes the responsibility as stewards of taxpayer dollars very seriously. We are grateful to our dedicated staff for embodying these values and are honored the city has once again been recognized for this achievement. Thank you to all of our Finance and Administration Department for your efforts and dedication on behalf of the Kirkland community. Thank you. Michael, you're out there. Okay, so now we are at item B, items from the audience. This is the time in our meeting when we normally hear from the public on matters which are not quasi-judicial or scheduled for a public hearing, of which there are none scheduled this evening. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and the council will receive up to 3 comments each on both sides of each issue. If you are present either in person or virtually and would like to address the council during this items from the audience period, please sign up using the online public comment instruction link or in person using the posted QR code. For those participating by phone, please dial *9 to be recognized to speak. Community members will be called in the order in which they signed up. Items from the audience is an important part of our business meeting, but we ask that everyone be treated with kindness and respect. We ask that you please not clap or applaud after a speaker or that you express your disagreement with a speaker. We want everyone in Kirkland to feel welcome expressing their viewpoints regardless of the content. Because they can be disruptive, signs and placards are also not allowed in council chambers during our meetings, regardless of their content. With that, Ms. Anderson will start us off with our first speaker.
Mayor, the first 6 speakers are all here on site in the chamber, and they're all speaking to the Juanita Heights Park topic. So the first 3 signed up are Rhoda Sloman, Elizabeth Talkman, and Scott Pettit.
Rhoda, please come up.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Rhoda Sloman, and we've been living adjacent to Juanita Heights Park for over 35 years, and we are very familiar with the history of the park, including landslide issues, various feasibility studies conducted, the annexation of land to extend the park, and the current state of high use and enjoyment by residents of Finn Hill and Goat Hill, dog walkers, hikers, even students commuting to school. We are here today asking that the council vote to reject a road through Juanita Heights Park. I'm sure you're all aware that this park is one of the Green Kirkland Partnership's restoration sites. I would like to thank Mayor Sweet, Deputy Mayor Arnold, and Council Members Falcone, Pascal, Black, and Curtis, and Jim Lopez for taking the time recently to walk the park with neighbors to see this precious land, the damage that's already been done by the geotechnical survey vehicles, and to listen to the concerns and desires of neighbors. We would also love to welcome Councilmember Nixon to walk the trails with us to see the park firsthand. Protecting open space from future development was the priority of City Council members when they voted on February 6, 2018 to nearly double the size of this park. And I'm thrilled to see that on the agenda tonight, there's a proposal to expand Juanita Heights Park by purchasing the Dunn Vegan Trust property. As you're all aware, this land was annexed to expand the park was acquired with funds contributed by neighbors as well as King County Conservation grants, which stipulated that the funds would prevent encroachment by future development, contribute to the ecological health of Juanita Creek, and this land is within the Juanita Creek watershed. It would conform to the city's comprehensive park, open space, and rec plan, provide opportunities for people to enjoy wildlife and their habitat, and support strategies of protecting and restoring habitats of Chinook salmon. How can the city justify selling this parkland to a developer, destroying dozens of old-growth trees and invaluable habitat which would be lost to the community forever? By asking neighbors for funds to purchase the land to become parkland and later selling part of that land to a developer would be a breach of public trust and would create an unacceptable precedent. We know the city cares about protecting and preserving land already designated as green space. Various geotechnical feasibility studies have been done in the past, all which concluded that the land was unsuitable for development. We asked that the city review these past studies, and we asked that the council make them available to the public. I spoke with Councilmember Pascal this past week, and he has made a strong public stand stating that he believes that the last remaining parcels of land should remain as forested open space, and the city should work with the county and Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance to secure the funds to purchase the Wu property. We ask that you consider the thoughtful words of a concerned second grader from Carl Sandburg, quote, she said, "I asked for Juanita Heights Park to be saved. This is a very special place where there are beautiful trails and flowers. It's very important to protect our forests with care and to save our land," end quote. And we too ask that Juanita Heights Park be saved by please voting to reject a road through the park. You hold the power to protect this park. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Elizabeth Talkman, then Scott Pettit, then Marnell Altizer.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see me. Good evening, Mayor Sweet, Deputy Mayor Arnold, and Kirkland City Council members. My name is Elizabeth Talkman, and I live on 89th Place Northeast, one of the houses adjacent to Juanita Heights Park. My house is directly downslope from the proposed road that would be built through a large portion of the park. I'm here this evening to request the council vote to reject this destructive road through Juanita Heights Park. Before my husband and I purchased our home in early 2019, we conducted research about landslide risks. As you know, Finn and Goat Hill have some exceptionally steep slopes. I researched that Goat Hill had a devastating landslide in 2010 due to overdevelopment, causing a significant damage to homes. I became aware that the city of Kirkland and King County invested in landslide analysis, particularly after the Oso tragedy in 2014. We used that information to help educate ourselves before our home purchase. We chose our home next to Juanita Heights Park with the knowledge that it would be more secure from landslide risk because it was surrounded by protected parkland that would not be developed. The City of Kirkland Fire Department publishes information about landslide risks on the city website. Kirkland's landslide vulnerability map, dated February 2020, shows that all of Juanita Heights Park is susceptible to landslides. The city's map identifies sections of high susceptibility directly through the area of the proposed park in bright red. These are the ravines through Juanita Heights Park, which are part of the Juanita Creek watershed. The landslide vulnerability map also shows massive landslide deposits below Juanita Heights Park, where prior landslides fell onto the Juanita Creek area. Developing a road through this high susceptibility zone exacerbates the risk that the slopes of Finn Hill will fail, destabilizing the land directly above our home. I ask that you protect Juanita Heights Park by rejecting this road proposal that would destroy the top portion of Juanita Heights Park, violating the sales agreement the City of Kirkland signed when it purchased these parcels for the park, and the City of Kirkland's grant application to the King County Conservation Futures Fund. Taking this parkland for a road to a luxury housing development will increase landslide risk, violating the city's initial intended purpose voted on by this council, its commitment to the county, and our public trust. Thank you for your time and your consideration. Please vote to reject this road proposal.
Thank you. Scott Pettit? Welcome.
Hello, City Council members, Penny, Mayor Sweet, and Deputy Mayor. I'm Scott Pettit. I live on 124th, just a few houses away from Juanita Heights Park. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak today about the park and how we use it. I'd like to review a few of the facts and things you've heard both from Liz and from Rhoda, things we know, things we've learned over the past few weeks. We know the land was sold by property owners to the city for the sole purpose of, and I quote, providing opportunities for people to enjoy wildlife and wildlife habitat and protect natural systems and features from negative impacts of land development. These were quotes that I took directly off the Kirkland City website with city letterhead for the purchasing of the land that was used for the park. We know the community also pitched in to help purchase the property for the same reasons, which I find a little bit ironic. We're discussing the idea of the community pitching in also to purchase the Wu properties to expand the park. it's an important element of trust, I think, between the city and the community that we're having now, this conversation. We know there are many residents, both on the Finn Hill side and the Goat Hill side, who oppose building a road through the park. And this is from the residents who actually are aware of this project. We learned about it a few weeks ago, and I think if we were to communicate it to everybody, it'd be a much more bigger issue. The known area is also susceptible to landslides. Several residents, as Liz spoke about and Rhoda mentioned, have also done studies and didn't develop for this very reason. And I wonder, which I hope you do as well, who becomes responsible if there is a major washout or the road gets destroyed? I can't imagine the cost of cleaning it up, and I can't imagine the amount of damage it would do to the remaining area of the park. We also know, or you may not know, that an average tree in that park contributes to about 300 square feet of tree canopy. It's not just the road on a map that we're going to be looking at. We'll be taking down hundreds of thousands of square feet of the park around us and changing its ecosystem forever. We know the city is also putting a value on the property being proposed for the road, with an overall impact to the risk factors you've heard about today, the value of the cost of replacing or fixing or maintaining over time. I can't imagine how much the value of the land it actually sits on would be worth. It's probably impossible to put a price on it. My ask is to make it a priority to discuss this amongst City Council and reject the road proposal. Have an environmental study conducted, funded by and contracted by the city and not the developer.
I'm going to have to cut you off.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next three speakers are Marnell Altizer, Richard Miller, and Scott Morris, also speaking to Juanita Heights.
Okay, now we will not be taking any more testimony in respect to the road.
Okay. Well, my name's Marnell Altizer, and I live up on Finn Hill also.
Marnell, can we help you with that podium? Sorry, Liz.
That's okay. I just would like to borrow Scott's speech and repeat it. I'm not prepared to speak. I thought I was signing up just to be in attendance to the meeting here tonight. And I should say the same thing for Richard. I signed him up, but that's a surprise to him. So
Okay, so
I'm
you support what's already been said.
And I just like to emphasize that I agree with what these people have prepared.
Marnell, we can't accept any more testimony.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Scott Morris, who also wanted to address on Holmes Point overlay.
I think this is okay.
Following Scott are Jim Held, Nick Meyer, and Todd.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor Arnold, council members. My name is Scott Morris. I live at 11184 Champagne Point Road in the Holmes Point area of Finn Hill. I'd like to briefly touch on two topics. One, on behalf of the Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance, of which I'm a board member, is to thank you and thank the city staff for proceeding with the purchase of the Dunvegan parcel in the middle of Juanita Heights Park. I think, as you have heard, that park is much treasured by the neighborhood, and it is very nice to have that additional parcel acquired. And as I indicated in the letter that we sent on behalf of the Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance, we look forward to working with the city on expanding the park and building out the Billy Goat Trail to the bottom of the hill. So we're very excited to see that progress being made. The second topic I wanted to talk about is one that I speak to on my own behalf, not as part of the Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance, but as a member of the Holmes Point community, is that in reading over the Holmes Point street standards, which was a very good study, and one I think that the community is very appreciative of the city having performed, because it indicates a sensitivity to the environment of that neighborhood, is that one of the recommendations included the possibility of expanding or widening Juanita Heights Park, Juanita Drive, yeah, I've got it on my mind, Juanita Drive by 8 feet in the entry sections, which are the sections that pass through the Juanita Woodlands and St. Edward Park. And as I indicated in a comment to the council, that would be a very significant environmental impact. You would be digging into hillsides, taking out trees, having to buttress hillsides. And I would hope that before this was ever done, the city staff would take a very close look at the need to do that, particularly if some of it is driven by pedestrian traffic. That traffic is probably best handled on pathways through the Juanita Woodlands or hopefully connectivity through the neighborhood itself. So I know that this is on the consent calendar. I'm just hopeful that when it comes time to implement some of these recommendations, the staff will take a close look at each environmental issue and consult closely with the neighbors affected. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Jim Held, followed by Nick Meyer and Todd Johnson.
Welcome, Mr. Held.
All right. Thanks for having me. This is a cool thing, I'm telling you, up and down. Anyway, my name is Jim Heald. I'm here to discuss the unlawful termination of the unvaccinated City of Kirkland firefighters. Each year, one of them risks their health during the beginning of this crazy pandemic, and most all of them have gotten natural immunity after being exposed. Vaccinated or not vaccinated, people are still getting sick with COVID. So it would stand to reason that vaccinated and non-vaccinated pose the same risk to the public and other public servants. You all can choose to stay home and stay safe. Essential workers don't have that luxury. This emergency use vaccination has now been proven ineffective. I've got data here to prove that. This is nothing more than punishment for those firefighters and EMTs that choose not to comply with the mandates. It's perfectly acceptable to say, my body, my choice, when having an abortion, but you'd better roll up your sleeve and take a jab of experimental mRNA therapy and give up your medical freedom if you want to keep your job. These firefighters deal with biohazards all the time. They have been thoroughly trained on how to stay safe. These unvaccinated heroes will risk their lives to save your life. How do I know this? Because anyone willing to give up their career and stand up against this tyranny has the courage to run into a burning building, to pull someone out of a burning car, to crawl underneath an unstable structure to save your life. This is pure discrimination against a group of people. You are all for inclusion as long as it fits the narrative. But you're willing and able to discriminate against these brave public servants that are not willing to comply with your mandate to take an experimental vaccination. My understanding is that COVID is spread throughout the fire stations in the city of Kirkland. You're fully vaccinated fire stations. Dr. Fauci, who is fully vaccinated and had 2 boosters, is now sick with COVID. Please reinstate these heroes. And for those of you that are sitting on the sidelines, thinking that somebody else is going to stand up and do something, you need to get up and do something. It's far too late in this crazy world to just sit back.
Thank you, Mr. Held.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Nick Meyer and Todd Johnson, and they are both virtual.
Welcome, Mr. Meyer.
Hi there. Just start speaking. First off, I want to say thank you to the mayor and the council members for taking their time tonight to listen to me. I am speaking just like the guy before me about laid off firefighters due to the vaccine mandate. I am a firefighter with Marysville Fire. I've been there for 10 years. I'm decided to kind of talk tonight to provide a different perspective. I was told I was going to be laid off too in October 18th because there was no accommodations available. During the 3 months I was off, the strain that was put on the fire department, I know one guy was working 280 hours of overtime, which we all know is not a good thing. Every fire department around right now is short-staffed, right, which increases call times, which increases people working, and you just have more and more hours worked, which just increases sick time calls, right? So all this plays off each other. The perspective I want to kind of show is that we were told the same thing that I think you guys were, because you guys are with WCIA, the insurance company. We were told that we won't be covered if something happens by that insurance company. We took it upon ourselves to call Lisa, their 19-year senior risk management analysis representative. And she had said that WCIA doesn't even cover any communicable diseases, and they haven't for about a year or so. They voted to not cover any just because of the subjectivity to them. And so we were able to, after the fire chief and the fire department found out about that, they were able to come up with accommodations, whether it's wear N95s, wear masks, test every day. I guess the point of me talking about this is just to implore you to call other fire departments, call other people who have been through this. I can assure you that there's a way that works. When we came back to work, it was nothing but excitement from the guys there, because there was just relief from them having to get mandatory every other day, working hundreds of hours of overtime. So I just implore you to use resources, call other council members, call other departments, see how it's being done. It can be done. And I promise you that it's going to benefit everyone in the long run.
Thank you,
That's
Mr.
all.
Meyer.
Thanks.
The last person signed up to speak is Todd Johnson, and he is also virtual.
Hello, my name is Todd Johnson. I'm with Lee Johnson Auto Family, and I'm here to talk about the timing of the adoption of the zoning around the BRT station. And I want to thank staff and council for an exhaustive and deliberative approach to make sure that the city was well served by this process. It goes back 4 years ago in 2018 when we approached the city about a rezone on our site. And at that point, you were already contemplating doing a separate analysis and zoning for the BRT station, and encouraged us to engage in that process, in which you spent nearly 2.5 years really going through the analysis required to have a very solid plan. That 2.5 years, you guys had announced the way it was going to happen, and you had everything announced on your website as far as how that was going to play out and the timing of that. And we based our decision to sell our property and to try to relocate in Kirkland on that timeline. Later in the process, Google did approach us to purchase our site. And with that, we felt that it was very important that you get it right. And it was, although we had designed the structure of the deal to accommodate the timeline that you guys had already announced and promoted, you guys felt like it was very important to delay that by another year to make sure that you got it right. And while that was very difficult and painful for us as a business, because there was a lot of risk with what we were trying to do to stay within the city of Kirkland, we do feel that it was the right thing for Kirkland to spend that extra time. So here we are where our process has extended now for another year. And you've done an amazing job, and I think you're getting it right. And we would just now encourage you to move forward now with this plan. I know there's a lot of different viewpoints that you've heard over the years, but or over the especially the last month or so. But the one thing it'd be really hard to argue is that you didn't spend enough time and enough deliberation to come up with the plan. With that, any further delay would cause difficulty, severe difficulty for our business to be able to stay in Kirkland. So I urge you to adopt this plan, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council on any issue this evening? Seeing none, I will declare this items from the audience period closed. That takes us to item number 8, the consent calendar. Before we have a motion, I'd like to ask Deputy Mayor Arnold to present the audit of accounts.
Madam Mayor.
Oops, sorry. I'll say that again in a few minutes.
Are we going to go back to special
So we
presentation?
actually have special presentations.
Yeah, okay. You told me to hurry.
Yes.
So, COVID-19 update.
So the only thing I wanted to pass on to the council there is, I know there was a question about when is the issue of the arch tenant protection discussion coming back to the city council. Just want to let you know that's going to be on the July 5th council meeting. As I mentioned last time, Deputy City Manager Jim Lopez has been talking with all stakeholders, and we'll have some information and some options for the council at the July meeting. So that's my only COVID-19 update. Unless any council members have any questions about the packet or the link to the update.
See none. Any update on 5434?
No, Madam Mayor, the 5434 update is going to be the land acknowledgement discussion that happens later in the council meeting.
Excellent. So that does take us to our consent calendar. Deputy Mayor, an audit of the accounts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We had payroll in the amount of $3,672,364.65 and bills in the amount of $4,429,870.74.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
So moved.
That's a tough one. I think it was moved by Councilmember Curtis. I'll give the second to Councilmember Falcone. Any discussion? Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to highlight a couple of things that I really appreciate under the consent calendar tonight. R 5544 that was mentioned during public comment tonight. I really appreciate the city prioritizing continuing to acquire green space. This is a resolution that authorizes the city manager to acquire a parcel to expand Juanita Heights Park. So I think that's just something that should be highlighted for the community. I know it's on consent, and I hope that it passes, but just wanted to just highlight that for the community because I think that's really notable. Also wanted to thank the community for their input leading up to Resolution R 5545 around the Holmes Point Drive street standards that were also mentioned tonight. Want to thank the community. I mean, we've gotten so much input. I participated in some of the public engagement meetings that were virtual, gosh, probably last year. I don't even remember. It feels like it's been so long ago at this point, but there was just such great input from the community over the past couple of years on that, up to and including today as well. So thank you for community members for providing that input. You know, there is certainly, this is a framework and a plan, and there certainly will be opportunity during individual projects for those projects really to be implemented well. And I think that a lot of the feedback that we received today was really thoughtful. And so thank you.
Thank you. The question is on the motion moved by Councilmember Curtis, seconded by Councilmember Falcone to adopt the consent calendar. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Mayor,
Motion.
There's an ordinance.
Oh, you go.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Councilmember Nixon.
Yes.
Councilmember Black.
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes.
Councilmember Falcone.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Mayor Sweet.
Yes. Motion carries. All right. So that takes us to our business agenda. The first item on our business agenda is the biennial budget adjustment. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll be walking you through the June biennial budget adjustments, and we'll be looking for action tonight. But here to take you on that journey is our financial planning manager, George Dugdale.
Thank you, City Manager. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see the slides now? Great, thank you. So thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members. We have 12 slides to run through that comprise the June 2022 budget adjustments. As ever, there's time for council questions at the end, but feel free to stop me and ask any questions as we go through. So before we get to the content of the current adjustment set, just a reminder of where we are in the process. We're now most of the way through the 2021 budget, and indeed we're looking towards the summer and fall development of the 23-24 budget. But before we get there, we still have a couple of touch points remaining. After this meeting, which is highlighted in bold on the slide, we have a July discussion on school resource officers, as well as a potential transportation benefit district. These are policy discussions, but they could require or lead to budget adjustments. And if council decides on something that needs formal action, staff will return with standalone adjustments for these areas. And then finally, in December of 2022, we have our regular end of year adjustments, which are largely related to grant receipts and other cleanup, particularly in capital projects. So moving on to the current adjustments. So council action is required for any of the three types shown at the top of this slide: unanticipated revenue, new funds, or new positions, projects, or programs. So those that are in bold are included in this memo and presentation. In addition, we do have some line item adjustments which can be made administratively, but are highlighted here because they relate to policy issues. The total appropriation increase to the budget overall is $5.48 million in this adjustment set. This is lower than we've had in many recent adjustments, but is not because the overall size of the adjustments are necessarily smaller. There are some large amendments being recognized, for example, the Houghton Village property purchase, which was funded through an interfund loan. Instead, the size of the appropriation is relatively smaller due to some offsetting reductions in appropriation, particularly in the capital funds. So these are technical in nature and don't impact project work or the actual cash. They are budget impacts. The most notable of these is the removal of a placeholder project for 2021 transportation debt. This was added during the budget development, and then when the debt was issued, the budget was amended to recognize the real project implications and the debt transfer into the projects. This left in place the placeholder project. We are now removing this so the 2021 budget can be accurately compared with 23-24. And it does not create any audit issues, and it kind of makes it easier to compare the two budgets. So as I walk through the adjustments, they're in four areas. The first is council directed, previously approved adjustments, and they go into other adjustments that require council action. As I mentioned before, some line item adjustments that don't require council action. And then finally, we have some one-time position conversions and some new positions added. So this is the table from the memo of all the council directed adjustments. I won't run through all of them, but these are adjustments previously approved by council, either through formal action such as a fiscal note or through informal action as part of staff memos since December 2021. The key adjustments include, as mentioned previously, a $14 million interfund loan for the purchase of the Houghton Village, and $3 million in REAP funds to replace federal funds in the 100th Avenue capital project. Outside of the CIP, this table also has the change in solid waste rates as part of the contract update, which can be seen there towards the bottom, as well as other fiscal notes and, like I say, some other position additions. Second table is the other adjustments requiring council action. This is mostly made up of grants and other actions which do increase the overall appropriation of this funds, but have not been brought before council yet. So like I say, these are mostly grants along with some interfund transfers, which do require council action because they increase the size of the funds receiving the additional budget. Key additions in this table include the REAP revenue for CIP projects shown in the final line, and some of the grants such as the CDBG grants in the general fund, which are shown in the general fund portion. continuing this table, and hopefully this table is legible. Apologies, there was a lot on it. So this table shows part 2 of these adjustments. The key adjustment here is the $16 million reduction in appropriation related to the transportation debt, which I mentioned previously. There are also some other adjustments related to CIP staffing. Again, these are technical in nature and do not actually impact project funding themselves. They're just a product of budget being moved between CIP projects, and we're removing these so that we can compare more accurately between 21-22 and 23-24 budgets. There are also some vehicle purchases in the fleet fund, which are generally funded through interfund transfers. Moving on to line item adjustments that don't require an appropriation. As you can see, there are some one-time positions added here, such as the active transportation program manager, as well as an adjustment within the general capital fund so that the David Brink Park restoration can be completed. The final section of the memo is larger than is the position conversions and some creations as well. This is larger than it's been in many of the previous adjustment sets. So this is shown here because council approval is required for all new FTE position adds. And as discussed at council's May retreat, the city is planning to convert a number of previously one-time positions into ongoing positions. This is partly related to the hiring environment and as ongoing positions are harder to hire for, partly related to reflect the ongoing nature of the work that these positions have been completing. So many of these positions, in fact, most of these positions were approved prior to the 21-22 budget. And so they were completing ongoing work, but have previously been approved as one-time positions. Converting these positions to ongoing helps not just with staff retention and with recognizing the work that people in one-time positions have been completing. It also helps as staff build the 23-24 budget by ensuring that we include in the base budget those positions that are doing ongoing work. So a citywide position summary. If council approves this action, the total number of FTEs in the city will rise to 700, and the total number of LTE positions, which is limited term or one-time positions, will decline to just over 24. You will notice there are some new one-time positions being added. These are either for true one-time needs, for example, the extension of the deputy city manager position, or for one-time positions which have recently been added and for which an ongoing need has not yet been established. So there are still some ongoing one-time positions in the city. Some of these may be brought back to council as part of the 23-24 budget development as service packages, which will be in line with previous practice. And some of them may be brought back as service packages to convert into ongoing positions. So my penultimate slide here summarizes the change to the overall budget appropriation from the December adjustments to now. You can see the $5.4 million overall increase previously mentioned, as well as some decreases in some of the utility capital funds and some relatively small increases elsewhere. So final slide, staff recommends approval of Ordinance 4797, adopting the revised 21-22 budget. As mentioned, there will be discussion and potential budget actions related to the Transportation Benefit District and school resource officers. And then the final, not mid-biennial, apologies for the mistake on the slide, the final budget adjustments in December 2022. And now for any questions.
Questions? Questions on the screen. Great report, George. You've brought us along all year long. Got a rethink over here, Councilmember Black.
No, not at all. Actually, I didn't have any questions. It didn't look like any of my colleagues did. So if there's no questions for staff, then I'm going to go ahead and move Ordinance 04797, an ordinance of the City of Kirkland amending the biennial budget for 2021-2022.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Black, seconded by Councilmember Curtis to approve Ordinance 4797. Discussion? All those in favor, please signify by, oops, sorry, it's an ordinance.
Councilmember Nixon?
Yes.
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Falcone?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Arnold?
Yes.
Mayor Sweet?
Yes, motion carries. This will take us to item B, amending the criminal code to address firearms at City Hall. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we will be proposing this ordinance to make us consistent with recently passed state law. Our city attorney, Kevin Raymond, has one slide to present to the council, and then we're looking for action tonight. Mr. Raymond.
Yes. Can you see that?
Oh, yes.
We're seeing your email.
We see something.
It is your email box, Kevin.
Hang on one sec. I've phoned a friend here. David, do you want to help me call this up? Sure, stop share. Yeah.
I know it.
Okay, there we go. Is that good?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you, David. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. Just have the one slide here. My presentation's not going to the second slide unless you can see that. So in this last legislative session, the state legislature passed a bill amending. There we go. Thank you. So in the last legislative session, the legislature passed a bill that, among other things, amended RCW 9.41.305 to make it a misdemeanor for any person to knowingly carry a firearm or other weapon, other dangerous weapon, while knowingly being in any city municipal building used in connection with meetings of the governing body of the city, or in any other location of a public meeting of a hearing of the governing body of the city during the hearing or the meeting. This law went into effect earlier this month, and we have signage up in our municipal buildings that indicating that this new law is in effect. Case law has said that in order for misdemeanor crimes, state misdemeanor crimes to be prosecuted in local municipal courts, the local municipalities need to adopt those RCWs by reference in their code. So what this ordinance would do would be simply to adopt this new revised section 9.41.305 and add it to Title 11 of our criminal code, so that when and if it becomes necessary to issue a misdemeanor citation under this statute, it could be prosecuted in Kirkland Municipal Court. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. City Attorney, just, you know, I was going to ask this question, but just for clarification, open carry of firearms is already illegal in City Hall as of today, and the City Council's action today is not adding to that. It's already illegal. All we're doing by this action is saying that the cases can be handled in the municipal court instead of having to be moved to King County District Court or Superior Court. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You know, effective June 9th, open carry of firearms and weapons is prohibited. What this does is allow those misdemeanor crimes to be prosecuted in our municipal court.
Thank you.
Councilmember Black.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to go ahead and move ordinance 04799, an ordinance of the City of Kirkland relating to the criminal code, firearms and weapons, limitations on open carry of firearms and other weapons, and adopting a reference to RCW 9.31.305 to add a misdemeanor crime to the criminal code.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Black, seconded by Councilmember Falcone to approve ordinance 4799. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please, oops. It's all ordinances tonight, isn't it?
Councilmember Nixon,
Yes.
Councilmember Black,
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes.
Councilmember Falcone,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Mayor Sweet.
Yes. Ordinance 4799 is approved.
Thank you, council.
Thank you, Kevin. So that takes us to item C, Kirkland's Native History Document and Land Acknowledgement Usage Guide. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. We're looking for action tonight. This is a resolution adopting these two documents, and here to introduce the topic is our Deputy City Manager of External Affairs, Jim Lopez.
Thank you, City Manager. Not all ordinances, Madam Mayor. Tonight, we have a resolution as well.
Yay.
And I am thrilled to introduce Erica Mascoro, our new Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager, to make tonight's presentation regarding Resolution 5546. Erica started her position earlier this month, and it is a joy to have her as part of the Kirkland family. So over to you, Erica.
Thank you so much, Jim, for the introduction. Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council, I am so happy to be part of the City of Kirkland. And now I'm going to put my presentation up. If you give me one moment. There we go. Sorry about that. So today it's my pleasure to present to you Resolution 5546, adopting the Kirkland Native History Document and Land Acknowledgement Usage Guide. Today, I will be covering the background, community feedback on the Kirkland Native History Document and Land Acknowledgement Usage Guide. And last, I will pass the floor back to Jim for next actions. Starting with the background. Back on August 2020, Resolution 5434 was passed and the city manager approved the compilation of a Native history document. On summer 2021, staff began meeting with and consulting with local tribal leaders and Native experts. Then in fall of 2021, the Native history document was added as an objective 3.5 in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging 5-year roadmap. On November 2021, staff presented to you the draft of the Native history document. And in December that same year, Council approved Resolution 5507, adopting the local land acknowledgement and directed staff to return after public comment period with a final version of the Native history document and land acknowledgement usage guide. Last, in December 2021 through March 2022, staff solicited community feedback on the Native history document. And now we will move into community feedback on Kirkland Native History document. First, the intention of this document is to provide as accurate as possible a historical narrative of Kirkland's Native history. Use this document as a reference for other policy documents, signage, and similar operational uses, and for use of Kirkland's residents, businesses, and visitors. Not to be viewed as a definitive scientific or scholarly document, and not to take a position on the status of federal recognition for any tribe. As I mentioned, we solicited community feedback from December 2021 through March 2022. The feedback was collected online via a comment form posted on the city website, as well as emails to staff. The sample size collected was small, less than 20 comments submitted, and we divided into 2 actionable ideas. added signage around the city citing historical areas and stating Native history, and incorporation into local educational efforts. There was an issue when the Word document was PDF'd for the City Council packet. The track changes did not come through. Staff is currently working on a solution to prevent this from happening again. The City Council received this version with the track changes via email, but we wanted to show them here for the public. There are very few direct edits and most suggestions were incorporated. This section on the document can be found on page 7. And now we're going to move on to the Land Acknowledgement Usage Guide section. Background, Resolution 5507 directed staff to develop a land acknowledgement usage guide for city personnel. The staff relied on its previous collaboration with tribal representatives to inform the usage guide, as well as best practices research of other city governments. Staff also attended a special training hosted by the King County Office of Equity and Social Justice. The Land Acknowledgement Usage Guide contains the Land Acknowledgement Statement and options for usage and recommendations on how to incorporate it into city staff meetings or events, board or commission meetings, city council meetings, community meetings hosted by the city of Kirkland, and ceremonial events. Staff also provided recommendations for council meetings, such as the land acknowledgement be printed on every city regular and special meeting agenda, and to be read out loud at city council meetings where appropriate as determined by the mayor. And now I'm going to pass the floor back to Jim for next actions.
So thank you very much, Erica. Yeah, if we could just push to the next slide. There are 3 next actions we want to highlight, but we want to also note that whatever feedback the council gives us tonight as well, we will surely incorporate in our next actions as well, should the council have some direction on next steps as well. But very briefly, we are very excited to take the usage guide to community groups and businesses and community members and work with them to help guide them should they want to use the guide as well. And we're very excited about that as, among other things, an opportunity to build relationships and share the vision of this really important work. Interestingly, and also I will work with Erica to work with some of our PhDs who gave us some feedback to clear up some interpretations. There weren't many, but there are a couple of facts that we're going to work with. And Erica has reached out to the commenters, and we'll work through those factual details, because we do absolutely see this document as a document that we will be editing from time to time. And we have built in an annual review process as well. So it should be an iterative process that really helps inform the city and allows us to continue to build these important relationships. So with that, we turn it back to you, Madam Mayor, for feedback, and we will be sure to incorporate any feedback into next actions as well.
Super. Okay, let's start by getting a motion on the floor. Councilmember Curtis.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 5546, acknowledging the first people of present-day Kirkland, adopting the Kirkland Native History document, and a land acknowledgement usage guide for use by city staff and various plans, policies, and programs.
Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Curtis, seconded by Councilmember Black. Discussion.
Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
First, Erica, welcome. It is so nice to meet you. We all are so excited you're here, and I know that you will make an important contribution to the city of Kirkland. So we're very happy to have you on board. This was a great packet. You know that I've been excited about this step So we're here. I'm happy. I was pleased to read the comments that the community is enthusiastically in support of this document and going to the next step. You know, here's the other things we can do. So that was great feedback. A couple things on the document. I was thinking that we should be a little more prescriptive in our language. Occasionally we say, you have the option to read. There's certain instances, such as when we do groundbreaking, I feel like anytime we put shovel in dirt, it's a time to do our land acknowledgement. So there's some tweaks to the usage guide that I think we can make over time. In my motion to approve this resolution, I do have one amendment which I have sent to council. And what I've done in this amendment is to make sure that in section 1 or section 2 on line 44 that we include local land acknowledgement in this section. We talk about the Kirkland Native History document, but we're not talking about the local land acknowledgement. To codify that we want to put our land acknowledgement on our city council agendas. So I'd like to make a motion to approve my amendment.
Second.
Thank you. And that is all the comments I have at this point. Thank you.
Okay. A motion has been made to amend the original motion by Councilmember Curtis, seconded by Councilmember Falcone, to include the specifics that Councilmember Curtis just laid out. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So the question is on the motion to approve Resolution 44. Oops, is there any further discussion? Oops. Deputy Mayor Arnold. Too many places to look.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Welcome, Erica. It's great to have you aboard. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate the work of the team and the absolute care and respect that went into the thinking of when and where we might use this land acknowledgement, and more importantly, where not. I think this really helps. I agree with Councilmember Curtis, and I am looking on that next level of detail to help guide the mayor's decision-making on when to read the land acknowledgement out loud. Right now, the document makes it her option. And so I also have an amendment to offer. I'd like to do some more thinking along the lines of what Councilmember Curtis mentioned. Groundbreakings make some sense. And when we're acting as stewards, either on council or on our boards of commissions, and having a public hearing or discussion on some of this long-range thinking, that may be an appropriate place. We saw our consultants on the 85th Street process incorporate the land acknowledgement into several public meetings that I thought was very effective. So like to see that. So to that end, I'd like to move an amendment to Resolution 5546, adding to section 2 on page 281, line 50, to state the city manager shall also develop criteria when the land acknowledgement is read aloud, such as during important dates or at certain events, for consideration by the council as additions to the council's policies and procedures.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Arnold, seconded by Councilmember Curtis, to make the adjustments that he just read and that we have received as an amendment to 5546. Discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? The amendment carries. Councilman? No.
Switching.
Oh, Twitch. Fine. Okay, the question is on the motion to approve Resolution 5546 as amended, moved by Councilmember Curtis, seconded by Councilmember Black. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Erica, I just want to add my greetings to you. It is so good to have somebody in your position. We are very excited to work with you, and we hear wonderful things about what you're doing already.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you to all the council members. I really appreciate it.
I'm sure we'll be meeting soon.
Absolutely.
Excellent. With that, I think that takes us to the end of our business agenda, moves us into item number 10, council reports. City Council, Councilmember Nixon? Nothing to report. Councilmember Black?
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Curtis?
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Falcone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to say nothing to report, but I just want to say one thing in that there's an upcoming event of the Eastside Human Services Forum that I wanted to invite each of you to. I'll send you the link to register. And it's on the issue of pay equity. It's a roundtable event on pay equity in human services. And it's on Thursday, June 30th at 9 a.m. from 9 to 10:30. It is a virtual event. We have some great speakers lined up. We have David Heppard from the Freedom Project, Paul Lawali from Friends of Youth, Debbie Lacey from Eastside for All, and Sean Good from Choose 180. This is just the beginning of a whole series and a future of the forum where we're really hoping to have a lot more educational events. Some of them will be geared more towards human services providers, some to government and other funder decision makers. So look out for additional invitations from me in the future as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Deputy Mayor Arnold?
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, well, I don't know what you guys have been all doing, but things are a little busy on my block. Just very briefly, AWC had a large city advisory group. We talked a whole lot about land use, talked a whole lot about the fact that we need to put our heads together in coming together with AWC around appropriate things for us to be lobbying for in the future. Also attended the Leadership Eastside Mayor's Luncheon, where we talked about where each of the cities on the east side is in terms of proceeding along their DEIB work. That was a fascinating discussion. It was really interesting to hear how all the other east side cities are doing. I think we're doing the best. I also had MISWAC and SWAC meetings. You got the minutes from those, or if not, they're coming. There was a regional stakeholder committee meeting on wastewater system evaluation and governance structure last week. It's the first of our initial meetings. We will be moving into recommendations by September. And then here at home, Public Works Week proclamation. I went to the Public Works picnic. It was really fun. We had a lot of Public Works people, and there was a lot of orange. It was great. Then this weekend, we had the Urban Pride event on Friday, which was an absolute blast, but everybody was absolutely soaked. I mean, the rain was just unbelievable. But I have to commend the drag queen performance was outstanding, very funny. And then Juneteenth on Saturday, I think for our first Juneteenth as teaming up with other cities, I think it went really well. I wasn't able to stay for the whole thing, but and we missed Ms. Falcone because she got sick, but we were well represented, and the cities of Woodinville, Bellevue, Redmond were all present and accounted for. So it was a good event. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Two quick items. The first, I want to thank you on behalf of the emergency manager, Heather Kelly, and Joe Sanford for participating in our Cascadia Rising event. We'll have a great after-action report, but we were thrilled to have the council's participation, and you gave us some great direction that we used in the following follow-up meeting on the operations side. So thank you for that. I also have a breaking issue that I haven't had a chance to talk to anyone about yet, but so I was informed by our human services staff that the Catholic Community Services Program, which funds basically people staying in the Belmont Hotel in Kirkland, people experiencing homelessness, they have run out of money for that program. So their budget period is basically June 31st to July 1st, so they're actually going to be out of money starting at the beginning of this month. The program is funded in partnership across all the East Side cities, and so they would need probably around $200,000 to extend it for another full year. Part of this is higher consumption, and some of it's also higher costs at the hotel. They've had to raise their prices a little bit as as many people who have experienced, the inflation. So what I wanted to ask council is if I could bring some options to the July 4th or 5th meeting for potential emergency funding from our human services reserves for council consideration at the next council meeting.
Any questions? I'd say that's a universal go for it.
And then any other calendar items from the council before we end?
Well, yeah, I will send written information about the 4th of July, the whens, the wheres, the whats, and I'll try and get that out the next day. There is a reception at Top Golf in the afternoon where we've invited our sponsors. We are one of the major sponsors. So if you can attend, that would be wonderful. I'll get the invitation to you as well, and to you, City Manager.
Thank you.
And with that, all right, this takes us to item number 11. One more, items from the audience. It's an additional time in our meeting when we normally can hear from the public on matters which are not quasi-judicial or otherwise scheduled for public hearing on our agenda, and assuming the rest of our meeting has been concluded before 10 p.m. Is there anyone, hello, Jean, no? There is no one from the public who wishes to make comments now, either in person or via telephone. Kathy, anybody on the line? Okay, with that, we will now go into executive session to discuss potential property acquisition. We will then go immediately into a closed session to discuss collective bargaining. We will expect to reconvene our regular meeting at approximately 9:45, I mean?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, 9:45, but only for the purposes of adjournment. With that, here we go.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.